All right. Well, first, thank you all so much for taking time to come here to this event. I'm grateful to be here with everybody. I want to thank Mimi and the team at UCF Life for organizing today's event. $5 trillion. $5 trillion is the amount that today's medical system is worth, which is a tremendous amount. I can't really even wrap my brain around a number that big. But among that, $4 trillion is for chronic disease care, which includes things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and many forms of cancer. And a lot of this, what the research is showing us today, is preventable based on the lifestyle that we live, right? The new science that's showing up, and it's not just new, this is science from a while back that is pointing us in this direction that lifestyle change can make a massive difference no matter how old we are when we get started, okay? Now, there's an old saying, you are what you eat. But today's culture, we prioritize taste and convenience above that old statement. And somewhere along the line, we've forgotten the connection between food and health outcomes. And we're going to break this talk today down into 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to look at why is it that we've forgotten the connection between food and health. In part 2, we're going to look at some of the most important nutrition science research. We're not going to get all technical because we want to understand what's going on. We're going to look at nutritional epidemiology and how it works. And finally, in part 3, I'm going to share with you some ideas about microgreens and the microbiome and how these little baby vegetables can be very valuable for improving our health and well-being. Okay? So, if you go on to that.
And Joe, before this lecture series is a little different than our regular. So, do you mind if people interrupt you and ask questions?
Sure. As we go on, if you wanna stop me and ask a question, we're happy to do that. Will you go to the next slide too, please? Okay. So there's a lot of factors at play that are keeping us blind from this. Cultural factors, the industry itself. Right? The food industry really wants us to continue eating a particular way. But I think the biggest thing is something that I myself am expert in, and that is the ostrich effect. This is a picture of me as soon as we get to the next slide here. The down arrow might work too. So, it's a little grainy because it's from 2015 and I didn't have the best smart camera. But in that picture, I weighed 250 pounds. I was eating the standard American diet and I was doing lots of drive-thrus. Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's were some of my favorites. I loved Chick-fil-A, those dipping sauces, right? And I was eating this abundantly. I didn't want to see the connection between this and the outcomes, but in July of 2016, I went to my doctor. I had weighed 250 at the time, and I got diagnosed pre-diabetic. All right. Deep down, did I know there was probably something to do with late night Little Debbie snacks, break room donuts and danishes? Did I know that probably that Chick-fil-A sandwich wasn't very good for me? Deep down I knew, but I was choosing to bury my head in the sand, right? I was choosing not to see that the food was really having an impact. And I think this is something we all do on an individual level. And a lot of times, there's this gray line between having something as just a treat and then the overindulgence that sometimes can happen. And we sometimes walk that line. What counts as just a once-in-a-while thing, and we know it's not so good for us, and then when does it get over to that place where suddenly it's too much and it's going to have this negative impact on us? Okay? But this runs deeper, and I want to share a story about a nutrition scientist who experienced the ostrich effect at a conference he presented at. Dr. T. Colin Campbell is a nutrition science researcher out of Cornell. And in the early 1980s, he was wrestling with this question. He wondered, what is the impact of animal protein on the proliferation of cancer? And he was running these studies where he would take a group of rats and he would inject all of them with an aflatoxin known to cause liver cancer. He would then divide the rats into 2 subgroups. One cohort, he would feed a very low animal protein diet, 5% of calories from casein protein. Casein is the protein in cow's milk, if you're unfamiliar. The other group would get a high animal protein diet, 20% of calories from casein protein. And he would just track the study group to see what happened. After the first trial, the results came in. There were 75% more precancer cells in the high protein group compared to the low. So he ran the study multiple times again and again and got the same results. Then he decided, well, what if I switch them midstream? So he would start the group with the low protein, and then 2 weeks in, he would switch them to high protein. 2 weeks later, he'd switch them back to low. And he would do the opposite for the other group. What he found is that as he measured those precancer cells in the liver, he could turn on growth and turn it off by the level of protein that he was feeding these rats. Now, he's a nutrition scientist, so he knows very well that this doesn't always translate to humans. And he wanted to study a human population. And with a grant from the National Institutes of Health, and in partnership with nutrition scientists from Oxford and Cornell, along with a team of nutrition scientists from several universities across China, they decided to study a rural population in China. And rural was all over different places in China is what they were looking at. Now, why did they choose this population? Because in rural China, in the late 80s when they were starting this study, people ate very regionally specific diets. Right? So in one region, we would have people eating a very meat-centered diet, very meat-heavy diet. In another region, we would have people eating a very plant-focused diet, a plant-based diet. And along this continuum, we would see people in different communities eating somewhere along this. Some leaning towards more plant-based, some leaning more towards animal-based, some in the middle. And they wanted to study this group because they kind of self-selected into these little groups of lifestyle and dietary choices that they all ate. Because they're Chinese, we also had a bit of a control for genetics, which they were after, right? They wanted to control as much as they could. So they go to China and they run this study. What are they doing? They're collecting blood samples. They're running the lipid panels, the A1C panels, all of the biomarker panels that they could. They're also carefully tracking what are these people eating? How are they living? So they would go to these places, interview the people, and then each year they would go to the lab, they would give blood, they would give urine, they would give stool samples, and then the data was carefully collected and tracked. So they ran this study, and at the end, Dr. Campbell published a paper. And in it, he reported that the people who ate a more plant-focused diet had lower risk of all-cause mortality, including lower risk of cancer, lower risk of heart disease, and lower risk of type 2 diabetes. So he goes to a nutrition conference in 1999 to present the findings from the paper. And he presents, does a much better job than I'm doing here, more detail, right? These are nutrition scientists. And at the end of the talk, they have Q&A. And the first person stands up to the mic and says, Dr. Campbell, please don't take away the food we love. And there was some light applause in the background. Other nutrition scientists agreed. They didn't necessarily want the foods that they love taken away. And this shows us how powerful the ostrich effect is, because we're talking about nutrition scientists. We're supposed to be objective, right, if we're studying nutrition. And this gives us a bit of an idea of how deeply the ostrich effect can really run. Okay, can you go to the next slide? But here's a question some of you may have, and I had this question too when I was thinking about food and the impact of food. Why is it that the foods that taste so darn good, that light up my dopamine, that make me have this amazing taste pleasure, why are those so bad for me if there's so much taste pleasure there, right? It turns out the answer to that question is in evolutionary biology. So if you go back 30,000, 40,000 years, humans are gatherer-hunters, right? We're roaming around trying to find food to survive long enough to pass on our genes. People are dying not of chronic diseases, but of infectious diseases, right? And so eating this way, we want to seek sweetness, saltiness, and fat, because those three elements kept us alive in a world of scarcity, right? So when we got to the place where we could find that salty, sweet, sugary, fatty thing, Our bodies craved it and we sought to find it because it was survivability. And that same biology is in all of us today. But do we live in a world of scarcity today? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you live even remotely towards a middle-class living, you can eat the richest, fattiest, saltiest, sugariest foods ever, all the time, 24/7. And the brain is going to tell you the same thing. This is awesome. This is fantastic, right? This is amazing food. And the brain is telling you, look, eat more of this, right? It just so happens now those are the things that are taking us out earlier than we want, because we want to live much longer now if we can live without pain and suffering, right? The industry itself takes advantage of this, of course. Food scientists today, if you could go to the next slide, are masterful at flavoring profiles and creating this connection to that dopamine. And they're in labs, they're constantly finding ways to make the food even more hyper-palatable, okay? And if you go into your grocery store, you're always gonna find some new thing that's gonna have some new flavor. And believe me, they've put people in the MRI machines, they've fed them the stuff while they're in the machine, so no matter what that person is telling them, they're gonna see exactly what lights up the dopamine. And they're gonna know exactly what concoction to make that food craveable, and they're gonna maximize profit to the best of their ability, right? This isn't just in processed food though. In the animal agriculture industry, we see the same thing happening, right? We decided to selectively breed the fattiest cows, the cows that had the most fat. We breed those two together, we get an offspring that has more fat. This in the industry is called marbling, right? And today, we have fatty, super fatty cuts of meat that have way more saturated fat than they ever did before, right? So we're moving this direction of even more hyper-palatability. Will you go back to the previous slide? And so there's other factors too that are involved in this. Now, you may be wondering about me, because I showed you the slide early on where there was a picture of me. I weighed 250. Well, what the heck happened to me? I'll tell you. Later that year, I got sick and tired of being sick, and I decided to do the complete opposite of what I had been doing. December of 2016, I started eating a whole food plant-based diet, which means I was eating the food that comes from the ground and stuff that comes from the trees exclusively. And amazing things started to happen. Within just 2 months, by Valentine's Day of 2017, just 2 months into this diet, I had lost 25 pounds. But other remarkable things happened. I had acne my whole life, even into my 30s. What an embarrassing thing, right? I go to teach class and I got more acne than my students do, right? But guess what? It disappeared in 2 months of eating this way. I went back to my doctor in July of 2017 for my annual checkup a year later, and I weighed 180 pounds. I weighed exactly what I weighed when I graduated high school. And I went in there and I got the news from my doc that I was no longer pre-diabetic. And he was amazed and he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "I'm just eating plants." And I said, "I'm eating what comes from the ground, what grows from the trees." And he asked me a question that puzzled me, because his first question was, "What about protein?" Now, I'm not one to judge people, because I didn't know that plants had protein too. I had to do a Google search back in December of 2016 and ask, do plants have protein? It turns out lots of plants have a lot of protein. Beans and lentils, tons of protein. Nuts and seeds, lots of protein. Even lettuce, I learned, has some protein, as does apples and oranges. Everything has a bit of protein, right? But my doctor didn't seem to know this. And I wondered why. Turns out doctors aren't trained in nutrition. If you look at the research on this, it's a pretty sad state. And I don't blame my doctor. I don't blame my primary care physician, because he's working in a system, right? When he went to medical school, he got about 1 week of training in nutrition, right? Along my journey for the past, that 6 months period of time, I spent about 200 hours studying nutrition. I had more nutrition knowledge than my doctor, only with 200 hours of study, maybe 400, right, at that time. And this is another layer that we get. And why is it that we can't really see what's going on, right? We're missing it. So we get sick, right? We go to the doctor. And think about this for just a second. Over the course of 10 years, you will consume 10,000 pounds of food. Just think about that. That's about an average of 3 pounds of food a day. 10,000 pounds. That's the equivalent of 5 compact vehicles, right? Just think that's how much food you're eating, right? Tell me that that doesn't have an impact. And when I went to my doctor in 2016 in July, when I was getting that pre-diabetic diagnosis, we did not say one thing about the food. The conversation was about metformin, which is a drug commonly used to treat type 2 diabetes. We spent the 15 minutes we had going over the side effects of metformin, how its mechanisms worked, what it would do for me, and that's it. We didn't cover anything with the food. So you take these things together, right? And it's just a massive amount of everywhere we look, the food is, right? But the industry does a lot of things too behind the scenes that I want to touch on before we go on to the next part of the talk. The industry is great at producing doubt. And the game plan for the food industry is the same playbook the tobacco industry used way back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? And here's how the game plan works. If you go back to 1938, there were 1,000 studies published demonstrating that smoking causes cancer. Why did it take more than 30 years for the Surgeon General's report to finally be released in the United States, telling the public, hey, smoking causes cancer? The answer to that is the tobacco industry established a playbook that works. What did they understand? Well, they understood human psychology and addiction. They knew people were addicted to cigarettes. They didn't have to prove to anyone that smoking was good for you. They just had to prove that the science wasn't yet clear and there's some doubt about what they're saying. That's all they had to do. How did they do that? They hired public relations firms. Create a little distance between themselves and the messaging that's coming out. The public relations firm would then put out messaging to all of the media. This time it's magazines, it's newspapers, radio, television. And because they have so much money, is there a lot of counter messaging getting in? Does the local scientist have a big fund of money where he can publicize his research and push back against this? No. So people kept smoking, right? Just to give you an idea, I was in my undergrad degree in 2000. We still had a smoking section in the dining hall in 2000 when I was going to college. This is how well that playbook worked, okay? In the book that I showed you before, Salt, Sugar, and Fat, which is a slide back with the Dorito effect, in that book, what Michael Moss outlines is that around 1999-2000, the tobacco industry bought up the processed food industry. So the tobacco executives realized tobacco's going away, we need the next thing. And they bought up most of the shares in processed food. And guess what their playbook does now? The same exact thing that it used to do. But it's not limited. This is not limited to just processed foods. Even animal products have this. And because the science doesn't get through, we often miss it, right? How many of you are aware that in 2014, the World Health Organization declared processed meats as a class 1 carcinogen? How many people have heard that before? 4 people out of 35. 4 out of 35. Now, why was that not front page news? Why was that not something that was well reported? These are the top scientists in the world. They're looking at the best research they can find. Now, what is processed food? Processed meats. Hot dogs, sausages, bacon, right? These are all things that probably should have a warning label. Class 1 carcinogen means the level of certainty we have, which is the highest degree of certainty that this causes cancer. And so many of us didn't hear about this. But you could imagine, though, if you're watching football on Sunday, what kind of ads are you seeing? Lots of cheeseburgers, bacon, all kinds of greasy food that's going to cause trouble. And at the end of that, is that network going to then run on 60 Minutes? Hey, by the way, we just want to let you know all that stuff we just showed you that those advertisers paid all that money for, it causes cancer. They're not going to show you that. They've got no incentive to show you that, right? They know where their bread is buttered, right? And so this stuff layers up, and then we end up with a very confused public, right? And this is the challenge that we face. So if you go to the next slide. One more. So in part 2 of the talk, now I want to transition and talk to you about some of the most important nutrition science that we can look at. And these studies have a couple things in common. The main one is this: they are long-term studies. They go on for decades. And why is it important that these studies should go on for long periods of time? The disease progresses very slowly. Heart disease takes a long time to develop, but it's developing from a very young age if we're eating a Western diet. And I'll give you an example of a study that shows this. During the Korean War, we were in the middle of trying to figure out heart disease, and the Framingham Heart Study had already started in 1948, so we're starting to get some evidence about what's going on. They wanted to understand what's the difference between the American soldiers who have been killed in action and the Korean soldiers who've been killed in action. What's the difference in their blood vessels? And all they did is they opened the bodies up and looked for fatty streaks in the blood vessels. Koreans are eating a very plant-focused diet. They're eating a diet rich in rice and lots of vegetables. American soldiers by this time are already eating a very standard American diet. Lots of meat on the plate, lots of, in this case, we're starting to already get into processed foods at this time. There's massive differences between these two groups. 18 to 24-year-old American soldiers already had fatty streaks in their blood vessels. You can imagine over the next few years, the next 2-3 decades, if they continue eating this way, saturated fat from all this food that we're eating, more saturated fat in the food than before, what's going to happen to those fatty streaks? They become plaques over time, right? The North Korean soldiers, no fatty streaks, right? We're not showing any signs of heart disease showing up in these soldiers, right? So it takes a long time, and that's why these studies go for a long period of time. These are the kind of studies we want to pay close attention to because they have a hard endpoint. Death is the hard endpoint, right? We're looking to see how did people live, what did they eat, what was their lifestyle, and then what eventually takes them out. And when we bring in a lot of data scientists can start making conclusions. These folks are way above my pay grade, by the way. To do nutritional epidemiology, you need an MD, and then on top of that, you need a master's degree in statistics and a master's degree in nutrition, right? So it's the equivalent of 10 years or more of postdoc study to be able to do this kind of research. So these people are amazing people running these studies. Framingham started in 1948, and it was run because we didn't know anything about heart disease at the time. Heart disease has been the #1 killer in America since 1901. Every year, heart disease has killed more people than any other thing, including COVID, with one exception. The 1918 pandemic was the only time that something killed more people than heart disease did. And heart disease is still the #1 killer, not just in the US, but globally today. And it's because most of the world now is eating a Western-style diet. It's driven by diet and lifestyle. This is how we're ending up here. Framingham is the study that showed us that cholesterol and high blood pressure are linked to heart disease. Framingham also taught us that smoking causes heart disease. These are some of the key findings. Now, they used 5,000 people in this small town up in Massachusetts called Framingham, and each year they bring them into the lab. And those folks will do blood work, they'll do lipid panels, they'll do all of those biomarkers. Their kids and grandkids and the spouses of the kids and grandkids are still participating today. In fact, this year, they're going to fly into Framingham, right? And they're going to go and give their blood. Now they also are tracking their genetic profiles too. So we have new science, of course. And this is pointing us in this direction of eating this way. The Nurses' Health Study, 1 and 2. More than 280,000 nurses and health professionals in this study. It's giving us a similar kind of data set. We're looking at what are people eating, what are the outcomes. The same kind of evidence is showing up. Eating a more plant-based diet is beneficial, helpful in prevention of all-cause mortality, including heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. Okay? The last one, the Adventist Health Study. The 7-day Adventists out in California are one of the only groups in America that are considered part of the blue zones. Has anyone heard of the blue zones before? Blue zones are people that have great longevity, but not only do they live a long life, they're also not on medications a lot of times. And they have this vitality. Oftentimes, many centenarians, people living to be 100, many people living into their 90s. The Adventists are a great study population because according to their scripture, they're supposed to eat a plant-based diet, right? So according to what they follow, they have to eat this way. A lot of people do. However, some will eat a vegetarian diet, which is they'll include eggs, cheese, and butter, right, and milk. And then there's another group that eats meat as well. So you've got these three groups that you could study. Now, the cool thing about the Adventists is even though they don't fully adhere to what they're eating, they're all very much on board with not smoking and not drinking, right? And we talked earlier about confounding factors. Eliminating those confounders helps us to strengthen the evidence, pushing us forward about a plant-based diet being beneficial. This study, a group of studies, is pointing us the same direction. Now, when I say a study, I'm not, there's a lot of studies that are run out of these data sets. Still to this day, nutrition scientists can ask a question and then pull from these data sets and get answers to those questions. So these are ongoing studies that are many, many years old, and this is why we want to study and look carefully at these kinds of nutrition science study. One quick note about the Nurses' Health study they want to share with you. They were asking a question just after COVID. How does your diet impact the severity of your experience with COVID-19? And they looked at the data, and what they found is people who were eating a more plant-based diet had far fewer instances of severe COVID, far milder symptoms when they got COVID, far fewer examples of needing to be intubated, and far fewer examples of dying of COVID. Whereas people that were eating the most higher meat intake diets experienced higher risk of being hospitalized, higher risk of being intubated, and higher risk of death from COVID. Okay, so this translates, I think, across the board into many, many different areas, right? Could you go to the next slide? I recommend a few books to pick up that I think would be really valuable for you. In the packet that you have in your folder, I've listed several other books too. These I recommend because I love books that are written by the researchers themselves. And this one I love because Dr. Levy was the head of Framingham for a number of years. And he presents the research in a very clear way, but there's also a bit of storytelling there. He takes you through the historical context, which I think is good. I want to be able to understand what's going on. The China study, I told you about this study here. It's really an excellent read. There's a couple other books by Dr. Campbell that are on the list that I give you here. If you want to read really about nutrition science and why nutrition science isn't a part of the treatment plan in Western medicine, The Future of Nutrition will show you that, because there's plenty of evidence going back over 100 years that nutrition can really treat a lot of the stuff that we have, but there's not as much money in it. Right? So if you're in a field like radiology, or you're in a field that produces an immediate return, right, those fields tended to grow much faster than nutrition science. And a lot of the nutrition studies, Dr. Campbell, when he was on sabbatical, went to Oxford and went to all these old libraries and dug up all this old nutrition science. And he was just like, oh my God, I can't believe how much is really here. Right? There's so much here. So it's called The Future of Nutrition is the title of the book, and it's in the packet too. But it's really a great review of the history of nutrition science. Right? So these are some excellent reads that I recommend. Can we go to the next slide? And they're all pointing us this direction. Whole food plant-based diet, beans, lentils, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, right? And if we look, and you don't have to be like me. I'm whole food plant-based all the way. I don't eat any animal products. I don't eat any cheese, dairy. I don't eat any of that stuff. You don't have to be all in, though. The evidence shows from studying the Mediterranean diet, those people live long, healthy lives too. But of course, their plate is full of fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds. It's not a big honking steak in the middle of the plate with, some fruits and vegetables as the side dish. The fruits and vegetables and the lentils and the beans are the main course. And then the meat is maybe a side dish on occasion, right? The nutrition diagrams from countries all over the world reflect this research. America's still has a little bit of special interest. I would recommend the Canadian plate as a good one to look at. If you look at Canada's recommendations, what they did in 2018 was pretty remarkable. Canada kicked out all the special interest groups. They said, oh, well, the dairy industry, the soda industry, and everybody else that wants to sell products, you're not part of the conversation. We're just going to include nutrition scientists. And they came up with a new plate in 2018 that's based more on nutrition science rather than lobbying. Here in America, we still have a lot of lobbying going on that shapes nutrition policy. So I would recommend the Canadian plate. But the plates around the world all show this. The base of the plate is vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes, berries, mushrooms, these kinds of things. So now I want to go to part 3 of the talk. Microgreens and the microbiome. All right, how many of you have heard anything about the microbiome as of late? We should be hearing about this because it's going mainstream. And I want to share just a little overview of what's going on. This is not going to be overly detailed, but I just want to do a quick flyover so we kind of grasp what's happening. Research is now showing us there's about 37 trillion microbes that live in your large intestine. Now, of course, in and around our entire bodies, there's somewhere around 50 trillion microbes. We have about probably 30 trillion human cells. Kind of interesting, right? We're more microbe than we are human. It's a weird thing to think about, but this is just newer science that's just starting to emerge. So in that large intestine, those 37 trillion microbes, what are they eating? Whatever you're eating, right? Whatever you choose to eat, they're eating. And you populate different kinds of microbes based on what you consume. So if you eat a Western diet, a standard American diet, you will have microbes that consume flesh and consume animal protein. If you eat a more plant-based diet, you will have microbes that consume fiber. All right? And there's big differences between these two microecologies. Turns out that microbes that consume animal protein, the microbes that consume animal flesh, tend to produce pro-inflammatory compounds. Right? This is inflammation in the body. Okay? If you go back in history, who is getting gout? The king. Why is the king getting gout? Every single meal is a steak dinner and a pork chop and every other rich kind of food he can imagine, right? These kinds of foods are pro-inflammatory. And you see these are the diseases of kings. But we all have them now because we have access to the same diet the king had, right? Way back when. If you eat a more plant-focused diet, however, you will populate your microecology with microbes that consume fiber. But it's not like fiber is just Metamucil. Like I used to think fiber is just Metamucil because that's what grandma took. That's what she got her fiber from, was the Metamucil. It turns out all of the different plants have very unique kinds of fiber. If we were to take the fiber from an apple, an orange, say spinach and kale, and we put it under a microscope, we would see fiber structures that look very different. They all look very unique. Very complex, by the way. In fact, so complex that our stomach doesn't digest fiber and our small intestine doesn't either. But in our large intestine, we have the heroes that do, which is those microbes. And what they produce, if we feed them a diversity of plants, is short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs. Okay? Now, what do those do for our bodies? This is how we can balance and regulate our hormones. Okay? Eating this way is excellent for making sure that hormone regulation is on point. Your immune system, 70% of your immune system lives just on the other side of the lining of your large intestine. There's constant communication going on between those. If you're eating a plant-rich diet, tons of diversity, what you're going to find is those short-chain fatty acids are going to give you massive benefits. This is where you're going to lower inflammation in the body. Okay? But it's not about one food, right? There's always this like new hero food that's out there. I don't know if you guys remember this, but back in the day, all the shirts that said kale, it was like kale had this moment. It's like, oh my God, kale is just like the most amazing thing. And everyone's like, if I eat kale, I'm going to be great. The real evidence is showing us diversity is king. A great study to check out, American Gut Health Project. Tracked 10,000 people for 10 years. They looked at their dietary patterns and their health outcomes. The key finding they reported is the people who ate the most diversity of plants had the best health outcomes, right? Remarkable. All these studies are kind of pointing us the same way, right? Microgreens, all right? How do these fit in? These are microgreens, little baby vegetables. This is red amaranth at the top here, okay? Has anyone ever heard of red amaranth before? All right, I got a few people. Okay, amaranth was originally grown in Central America. It was the staple crop of the Aztecs. It grows about this tall. It's a complete protein, by the way. It has all the essential amino acids. This is excellent for heart health. Have you noticed? Yeah, if you want to flip it on, go right here. The top one, I think, will flip it on. Yeah. So you see that bright magenta color? Anything you eat that's going to be that color, which includes hibiscus, right, red beets, those are all going to be beneficial for heart health. It just so happens when the vegetables are really small, these are microgreens, baby vegetables, when they're this small, they have 40 to 100 times more nutrients than adult vegetables. Now, what food has the most nutrients on the planet? Vegetables, right? Vegetables are the king of nutrients. Nutrients are invisible. We don't see nutrients, right? Estimates now are this, there are 5 million different nutrients in vegetables. 5 million is what they're saying now, which is astronomical, right? These are vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, polyphenols, right? All of these things that are super beneficial for us. What are we concerned with, though, in today's world? Protein. We're concerned with protein. I'll give you a quick story. Dr. Garth Davis is a wonderful nutrition scientist, and he went to talk in front of a group of doctors. And he asked the whole audience, and there's 500 doctors at this conference. He says, how many of you have one vegan or vegetarian in your practice? Everybody's hand went up. And he said, how many of you have treated any of them for protein deficiency? Not a single hand went up. And everyone in the front row is doing this, like, oh man, everyone behind me must have their hands up. Nobody's hand was up. And Dr. Davis said, let's let go of the protein obsession. It's insane, right? And he went on to say, do you know how much protein is in human breast milk? And they didn't know. How much percentage of human breast milk would you guess is protein? Any guesses? It's more than that. It's only 12%. 12% of human breast milk is protein. And if you can feed a baby exclusively on human breast milk, and how fast do they grow? Pretty fast. They'll triple in size in like 2 years, right? Massive growth on just human breast milk with just 12% protein. We are way over protein. Now, I am pointing out, and I want to say this with caveat, as we get older, we do need slightly more protein. I don't want us walking away thinking that there's not evidence to show that. There is. It's just we're so protein obsessed now, we forget about the other things. And the thing about microgreens that's valuable is the stuff we don't see, right? These are small. But I'll give you an example. This is micro broccoli here, okay? This micro broccoli, 1 ounce of this will equal more than 5 pounds of full-grown broccoli from a nutrient standpoint, right? That's how much more nutrients this has compared to adult broccoli. And so how do you eat this stuff? Well, you add it to whatever you're having. You put it in sandwiches, salads, smoothies, wraps, right? What was I having today for lunch? Last night, you know what I made? I made tofu, and I made this amazing seasoning that made it taste just like sausage. And then I mixed it in with pasta sauce, and I had onions and peppers in there, and it was fantastic. And after I plated my food, what do you think I put on top? Tons of microgreens, right? Because there's so much nutritional power in these greens, right? Ability to lower inflammation in the body, okay? I want to share 2 stories before we close and go on to Q&A. Can you flip to the next slide? One more, sorry. I already, sorry, one more. Just the next one, if you would. So 2 stories I want to share. I deliver these microgreens every week to the local Orlando area. And how I learned about microgreens is my own health journey. My wife, who's in the back, her name's Kat, she and I met at a plant-based group. And it was remarkable because we both shared this journey of healing ourselves by eating plants. And when we did, it was this clicking that happened because we realized there's food here that can really heal people and can make a difference in people's lives. She actually introduced me to microgreens and had been eating them from back when she was originally trying to heal from. She had severe arthritis and was dealing with chronic kidney disease in her 20s. Really, really severe stuff. Healed all that with a plant-based diet. So we deliver the microgreens locally. And I deliver to this lady in Winter Park, and I bring her 3.5 ounce boxes of greens every week. And I went to her, and I've been going to her for 4 months now. She saw me at a talk I gave at the Women's Club of Winter Park. And she came to the door and she said, please don't stop doing this. And I said, why would I stop? You pay on time. Every time I come, you pay me. I'm happy to deliver to you. And she said, no, you don't understand. She's like, I've had arthritis so bad. And she's 80 years old now. She's like, I had arthritis. I've had it so bad now that I've had to spend for the last 5 years, I spend $1,000 a month for massages for my shoulder because the pain is so bad. She said, I no longer need those massages because the power of these greens has reduced that inflammation, and I no longer have that pain in my shoulder. And I was like, oh my God, it's remarkable, right? There's one last story I want to share, and this comes from one of my nutrition science heroes, Dr. Michael Greger. He runs this nonprofit that shows us nutrition science, and it's nutritionfacts.org. And when he was a kid, he was 14 years old. His grandmother was 65 at the time. She was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease. This is the part where they tell you, hey, go home, get your affairs in order. There's not much more we can do. Now, she had type 2 diabetes so bad that they would have amputated her legs if not for the severe heart disease, right? So she went home. Did she just buy a grave? No. She looked. She wanted to find something. She found a guy in California named Dr. Nathan Pritikin. He was bringing people out to his retreat center. He'd put them on a water fast for a bit of time, and then he would introduce them to a plant-based diet. So they wheeled her in. She spent 6 weeks there. She walked out of that clinic. Not only did she walk out, she lived to be 96 years old, eating a plant-based diet for the rest of her life. So even someone with end-stage heart disease, when they make this kind of change, can see dramatic results that show up when we commit to eating this way, right? Sometimes the challenge, though, is getting there, right? Sometimes the challenge is getting there. But I always say, when there's a why, there's always a how. And I think the why part about spending more time with our kids, our grandkids, right? Even great-grandkids, right? Hopefully maybe wanting to see great-grandkids someday. Those are things that maybe motivate us to start leaning in and giving this a try. So that's what I would encourage you to do as we close out the talk. I brought some samples today of microgreens that I can pass out to everybody. And so I'll pass this over to Kat. As we start Q&A, we're going to gift you all each a small pack of greens. So it's a personal size one. So we harvested these today. And so these have a mix that we often offer at the farmers markets. And you can put this on kind of anything you're having. You'll see here what they look like. Yeah. So these containers are compostable. We use non-bleached paper towels as well on these too. And you could put this on whatever you're eating. We put a little variety in here because that power of diversity is so important to us. And so, did you get one too? Yeah.
I'm going to ask the big question. How do I eat it?
Great question. Yeah. So it's really just about what works for you. What are you already having, right? I add them to everything. I put them on sandwiches. I put them in salads and smoothies and wraps. I make a lot of stir fries. I'll put them in my stir fry. I don't cook them. I'll cook my food and then I'll add the greens afterwards. I recommend make a black bean burger, right? Now you can put them on a Whopper if you go to Burger King. But I'm gonna push back and I'm gonna tell you that what's in that Whopper is gonna cancel out some of what's in the greens. But they go good on pretty much everything and anything. Yeah. Go ahead.
What about fish?
So it's a great question. I've seen a lot of good evidence that there's benefits to fish. And so the omega-3s in fish is something that can be beneficial for people. And there's studies that show benefits to fish. I think we know, probably you know too, there's some challenges with fish with heavy metals. If fish are eating other smaller fish, they're consuming more and more of the heavy metals. So that would be one concern with fish. But the evidence is showing that fish is relatively healthy. So if you're going to have some meat, I would say fish is probably going to be the best bet, I would say, among all the other meats that are out there, the possibilities. I think that's a good question, but I'm just giving you what the evidence is. What I see is the evidence showing. Yeah.
Chicken, turkeys, how about that?
Okay, so chicken has a lot of saturated fat still. It really does. So when you go to your doctor and they always tell you cut out red meat, that's the main culprit of lots of saturated fat. But chicken today has a ton of saturated fat. It's also the way the animals are raised and how It is. And 99.8% of the animals are raised in CAFOs, right? Concentrated animal feeding operations. And so if you look inside of where the chickens are growing, it takes 6 weeks now to grow a chicken, right? And they're slaughtered at 6 weeks. They can't walk. They're so overweight, and the conditions they live in are terrible. It's the antibiotics. Like, you're giving them tons of antibiotics to keep them alive because they got to be confined in these tight spaces. And so it's problematic. And we think of it as like, oh, it's healthier, but it still has a lot of saturated fat. There's a lot of cholesterol in there. So it's, what I do to get like a chicken-like flavor is I will marinate my tofu, and then I'll cook it, I'll bake it in the oven, and I could get a pretty close approximation to chicken, and it tastes fantastic. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we do. Yeah. In fact, in March of next year, we're planning to do a full-on workshop where people can come in. We have grow kits, and so when you come to the workshop, you get a grow kit, and we do a talk, and we walk you through how to grow microgreens. We do the planting session, and we teach you everything you need to know about how to keep the greens alive and how to thrive as a grower. We also offer the grow kits that you can order online on our website too. So you could go to our website, you can order grow kits, and we ship all over the US. And so, yeah, so if you're interested in the workshop too, just see me afterwards, or make sure you have my contact information. Give us a follow on social media, and you'll see some updates coming up. If you want to give me your email address later, I could put you on my email list. So when we're about to run the workshop, we'll open it up for you. Yeah.
So I've got a weird question.
Sure.
So I eat a lot of Asian food, and so the bean sprouts, but there's always an issue, there's always the concern of like something like that can grow listeria. And
Yeah.
so how, because this is kind of, I don't want to say it's the same thing, but how long do I keep this, and how do I keep it fresh, and when do I have to worry
Yeah.
that there's something growing on it? So I've avoided this
Yeah.
simply because, bean sprouts, you have to eat them like a day.
Okay, so this is a great question because there's sprouts and then there's microgreens, and they're two different things. So sprouts are grown typically in jars in water. So what I could do, if I'm doing bean sprouts, for example, I would put my mung beans into a mason jar, and I'd fill it with water. I'd let them soak overnight, and then I have a mesh lid that I put on. And then I'd rinse them twice a day, and then I have sprouts. And you do have to consume those within a couple days. Why is that? It's because they're growing in a moisture-rich environment where there's lots and lots of moisture. I want to show you something about microgreens. These are growing in soil. And so let me just show you. Yeah, it'll be easier. You can see it here. Cat can maybe grab another tray too. You can see this is grown in soil. If I lift this, you can kind of see that there's soil there. The top tray has holes. The bottom tray is where I water. So I'm keeping the water off of the top. And so those are going to be dry there. Now that's going to taste just like a radish. If you were to taste that, that's going to taste just like a radish. But it's going to have more flavor because it's younger. Flavor tells you a lot about nutrients, right? If you get that tomato from Publix and it's like, tastes like cardboard, there's probably not a lot of nutrients there, right? These you're going to notice flavor because the nutrients are there. Now, to her other point, keep it in the fridge when you get home. It's fine for a few hours out when you're out now. When you get home, put it in the fridge and then put it on whatever you're going to eat. Yeah. Go ahead.
In a plant-based diet, why is olive oil not supposed to be consumed?
Okay, so this is a great question. She's asking about olive oil. And so there's different perspectives on this. So I'm going to tell you both perspectives. So there's one group of people, and this is Dr. Esselstyn. Dr. Esselstyn wrote a book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. His approach to healing from heart disease means cutting out all oils, all salt, all sugar, and eating completely whole food plant-based, okay? Now, why he believes that's good is that we're not like olive oil doesn't have a lot of saturated fat, so that's a good part about it too. But his belief is that eliminating that saturated fat altogether, not like altogether, but just having it in nuts or in whole food form is better for us. Now, the evidence shows us too that olive oil is pretty healthy, right? Another kind of crazy thing is even canola oil, right? Does it get a bad rap today? Lots of people say it's bad. If you look at the evidence, though, the evidence doesn't show that, right? So what we're looking for when we look at these studies is, what's the inflammatory markers say about canola oil? Well, it shows it's anti-inflammatory. So some of this stuff is twisted because they need a villain, right? And the villain is going to be something that they can blame for all the problems, and then we're going to bury our head in the sand, and we're not going to think about the chicken and this and the other things. Instead, we're going to say, oh, it's seed oils. Okay, beef tallow is going to do better. Saturated fat up the wazoo, right? Definitely going to clog the arteries, definitely going to cause trouble. So this is where the science sometimes gets muddied, because you have industries funding research, right? And industry-funded research usually comes back in support of what the industry wants. So it gets to be a very dicey kind of place with this. But I would say this: if you're healthy, I don't see anything wrong with olive oil. I cook with olive oil still, right? And I think that if I was in a rougher situation, if I was at a place where like I've got stage 2 heart disease and I really have to kind of like dial things in, I would then probably even avoid oils. I would just be like 100% whole food plant-based. Yeah, go ahead.
I could eat vegetables and fruit all day long, but now lately I think, and I try to buy organic as much as I can, but now I think, oh, I'm going to eat all of these veggies, but I'm eating this much pesticides too.
Yeah.
So I break even or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's a great question, and it's something that we're all concerned with today, is the pesticide level. I want us to think about this though. Yeah, she's.
It's just like, how do I know, or
Yeah.
have to buy organic? Is organic from other countries?
Yeah. She's asking about how we're worried about pesticides on our vegetables and on our fruits, right? And what do we do about that? And so we're eating more vegetables, we're eating more pesticide. Now I'll say this: if you're eating like a pork chop, for example, how much vegetables did that pig eat to make that into pork? It's like 40 to 1, right? Sometimes 40 times more intake of pesticide to make that one cut of meat. How much more pesticide are you eating if you're eating meat compared to plants? Significantly more, right? Significantly more, because you're feeding that animal. And is that animal eating organic? No. That's getting the stuff that's sprayed with the most pesticides, right? That's the monoculture that we have. That's where all the stuff is going. So there's a wonderful group called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. Dr. Greger, who I talked to you before, talks about this. Foods that have like a skin, like a banana, for example, are much safer if they're sprayed, because we can peel that whole skin off. Kat, go ahead. Yeah, Environmental Working Group is the name. So if you want to look that up, Environmental Working Group, and they kind of share with you what to look at. Now, I would say this: you're still much better off. Like, a lot of people can't afford organic, okay? For those folks, I would say buy conventional anyways, because you're going to consume far less pesticide eating conventional fruits and vegetables, beans, than you would if you're eating animals that are raised, and they're going to be fed more pesticide, right, by way of just the dint of eating so much. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah. Please.
What do you consider a serving size of this? Like, how much do you need to get the benefit out of eating microgreens?
It's a great question. The science isn't exactly clear on this. There's not like a set, like, how you got to eat this much or that much. I have clients. I have one client who gets 10 3-ounce boxes a week, and these are massive. So he's eating like a pound of microgreens or more every week. I have clients that are eating a lot of greens. I have other clients that are buying 1 or 2 3-ounce boxes, and they eat them throughout the week. Because they're so nutrient dense, you don't need a lot to give you those nutrients that you have. I often just suggest to people, if you're going to buy like a 3.5-ounce box of the microgreens, you can stretch it over a week. It'll keep well in the fridge for a week. When we go to market, I'm bringing stuff that's harvested day of or just like late the night before market. So it's as fresh as you can get, right, as far as produce.
Actually keep this, or not this, but
That'll keep for 7 to 10 days in the fridge.
this will.
Yes.
And what size is this?
This is a really sample size. So this is way smaller than what we offer. The small that I offer is triple the size of this. And then the large that I offer is double the size of the small. So it's a significantly more.
What farmers
So in your folder, I have a list of our farmers markets that we put in there. We're at downtown Lake Eola. Has anyone gone to the Winter Garden Farmers Market before? We're at the Winter Garden Farmers Market. Do you know where the big produce stand is under the train station? My booth is right across from that.
Our student assistant is the president of the Oviedo Farmers Market.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, Delaney is the president
Very
of the
cool.
Oviedo Farmers Market.
Yeah. We do celebration, and we do I do the villages too, which it's a little ways out there, but yeah, people are looking at me like, oh boy, the villages, huh? Yes.
Now, do you do the Winter Garden Farmers Market every week? Because I see that you have the Villages Farmers Market at the same time.
So my wife goes to one and I go to the other. So we both go. So yeah, we do them both every week. Yeah, so both. Yes, sir.
Is there a cutoff of how much non-plant-based food you can eat? In other words, meat, and where you're gonna be okay if you do the plant-based, plus you like a steak, for example?
Yeah. I think it's about, if you look at the Mediterranean style diet, they're having meat on their plate a couple times a week, right? They're getting a few servings of meat. I think that there's some recommendations about what safety levels are as far as like if we're thinking about cancer and things like this. But I think the Mediterranean diet, we're still having some meat on the plate. It's usually a much smaller portion. It's more of a seasoning, more of a garnish on the plate than like the main course. Those kind of diets are, the Mediterranean style diet. You see people in Sardinia and Okinawa eating this way. They're still having some meat on the plate. Those people are very healthy too. So I think that as long as we're not, I would frame it this way. If we eat 85% whole food plant-based and 15% whatever the heck you want, you'll probably be okay. You'll probably be in pretty good shape. Now, everything is there's always challenges. Everyone's got, not everyone, but there's the story of the grandmother who smoked a pack a day and ate bacon sandwiches every day and lived to be 100. And there is such a thing as the genetic lottery, where you just will not produce atherosclerosis. You can do whatever you want. Now, that's not most of us. Most of us are going to develop plaques in the blood if we eat these Western diets. Yeah. Yes?
Any data to show that a plant-based diet can prevent or reverse dementia?
It's a great question. There was a study recently done by Dr. Dean Ornish, and he ran this trial and published a paper in 2024. If you want, I'll send you that paper. But Dr. Dean Ornish was asking this question. If we do a lifestyle intervention for Alzheimer's, would people have improvement with dementia? So he took a group of people with dementia symptoms and brought them in, and they did a baseline cognitive test, the standard dementia test that they would do. And then they put them on a plant-based diet. They gave them exercise, meditation, yoga, connection to family, and then counseling. Those were the elements. And then 20 weeks later, they tested them again. And they tested better in cognition, cognitive function. Their scores were better after 20 weeks of the trial. Now, what they also did is they took pictures. They did the amyloid plaques. They looked at the MRI of the amyloid plaques in the brain. And after 20 weeks, they saw a reduction in some of those amyloid plaques in some of the participants. So that was a 20-week trial. I could imagine, the funding is so hard to fund longer studies than this, but this is pointing us this direction. Now, I'll give you one other thing. My father was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, and I've read enough to know that a plant-based diet is beneficial for not just the body's health, but the brain health as well. So I went to Buffalo when he was going to his appointment. I flew up to go to the appointment to meet with the neurologist, and I asked the neurologist, I said, what kind of diet do neurologists eat? He said, well, we're mostly plant-based. And I said, well, why is that? He's like, the evidence is pointing us this direction. We should be eating a more plant-forward diet for cognitive function as we age. And so, and if you think about it, though, we have blood vessels that are flowing all the way to our brain. They're much smaller. If we're getting plaques throughout our entire body eating a Western diet, are we going to probably get plaques in the brain too? Those are small blood vessels. Yeah, it probably is, right? So it turns out that eating this plant-forward diet is very protective. You had someone from Parkinson's last week. Yeah, and he was demonstrating the same thing. Plant-forward diets are beneficial, right? Are protective for brain health. Yeah.
So, quick question.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're working on a book right now, my wife and I, and that's going to be coming very soon. Besides that one, though, there's a lot of good recipe guides for, I think, moving towards a plant-based diet. One that's in there is the one I used when I was first transitioning over. I learned by watching this lady named Jill Dalton, and is it Whole Food Plant-Based Cooking Show, Kat? Yeah. So it's a Whole Food Plant-Based Cooking Show. That is very, very helpful. I'm working on another workshop that's more geared towards cognitive psychology and how do we use the tools of cognitive psychology to move ourselves forward in leaning towards a plant-based diet. So there's a lot to learn from how behavioral scientists are now helping us to move forward to make those kinds of changes. As far as adding the greens, my biggest suggestion would be eat that whole thing however you can. Some people put a little drizzle of olive oil or a little bit of balsamic on there and eat it as a salad. That's fine. Some people will dump the whole thing in a smoothie. That's fine too. However you can get them in is the main thing. And if you can just add them to anything. I bring them to restaurants. I have people looking around like, what the hell's this guy doing? My wife and I will be at the restaurant and it's just a big old pack of our microgreens there. And then suddenly the chef's coming out, what are you doing to my food? Nothing, we're just adding some greens. Don't mind us. So I say, and I'm not, I just want to eat more of this stuff because I know the power of it, right? And I want to live a long, healthy life. I want to encourage others to do the same too. Yeah. Over here.
So how hard is it to grow?
You know, we just taught a class of third graders back in the spring. So I'll say this. They shared on social media all of their grows and they crushed it. They did such a good job. Now, the main upkeep is you got to water once a day. So if you got a tray growing like this, if you've got a desk lamp or you got a little grow light, they'll clip on to like a tabletop. You have a little grow light that comes over the top of your greens. If you can just remember to lift your tray and pour water once a day, that'll cover your upkeep, right? If you can remember to do that. That's enough. That's what the upkeep really involves. And then you've got greens that are fresh that you can cut and add to whatever you're having. Yeah. I'll go here and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, so you can keep these as like infantile plants, more or less, and continue just to take the tops off? Is that the process here?
I wish. Once you cut them, they don't regrow. There is an exception. Pea shoots, you'll get a second cut. They're just robust. I don't know how. But one thing you can do is if you're growing, our trays we offer for grow kits are 10 by 10, so it's half the size of this. So it's a nice sized tray though, right? It gets you plenty of greens. What you can do when they get to around this stage is you can put the whole tray in your fridge. They'll keep in there that way for about a week to 10 days, and then you can cut them fresh that way. Now once you cut them, you compost what's left and then start with fresh soil. And you regrow them again. But they're pretty easy to grow. A lot of fun to grow too. You can see the growth. It happens so quickly. Like if you start out one day and then like in the evening you go back and look and you're like, oh my God, it's really much bigger than it was earlier in the day. So they grow pretty fast too. It's 10 to 14 days from seed to harvest. So you're talking a 2-week period, right? Yeah. Yes? Awesome.
There was a question about pesticides.
Yeah.
A lot of seeds are pre-treated.
Yeah.
So where do you source your seeds?
So we have several seed suppliers, and we are getting USDA certified organic seed, right? Yeah. So we get a report from them that shows, what they have. So we're still at the mercy of regulatory systems doing what they're supposed to do, right? I don't have the time to go to the farm and be a detective and find everything out. But we have, on our Instagram page, I have a little icon called Seed Transparency. And what we do is we show video of the seed bags, and we show that there's the USDA organic on the seed. It's a great question because the pesticide residue can be there in the greens if we're using seeds that are conventional. We use heirloom organic seeds because the heirloom is when they're tested for pathogens too. And so you want those high-level seeds. I always tell people just when you get a grow kit, if you get a grow kit from us and you're rebuying seeds, if you don't buy them from us, just don't get them at Home Depot. Just get Get the organic, spend the money to get the good seeds because it makes a big difference in the quality of the greens. Yes?
This is gonna, sort of a rhetorical question and a very naive question.
All right.
So what exactly is the difference between a plant-based diet and a vegetarian diet?
All right. So the difference would be this, and there's different ones. So there's vegan diet, which includes like all plants, but also can include Oreos because they're vegan. Some vegan junk food is in there, right? So you can have some of those things. And that vegan also denounces or shows kind of a perspective about an ethical concern for animals, right? So there's that angle. Now, vegetarian is I'm eating no meat, but I will eat cheese, dairy, and eggs, right? Those kind of things. By the way, the cheese was the hardest thing for me to quit when I was making my transition. I was a cheese addict. I loved the cheese. There's a great book called The Cheese Trap, which teaches you all about that addiction. And Dr. Barnard breaks it down from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, talks about all the addictive qualities of cheese. But that's a vegetarian diet. And then a whole food plant-based diet is I'm not eating vegan junk food. I'm not eating Oreos. I'm not eating processed foods. I'm eating whole foods exclusively. I'm not having animal products at all. Yeah. Yes?
So I'm vegan, so I eat that junk food. Never used it. Wasn't there when I started my vegan food. But I just came back from Europe and I've traveled a lot internationally, and there's always vegan food for me.
Yeah.
On the menu. Even like in Scotland and Ireland, when people are like, you're never going to eat there. I had the best food. We don't do that here.
Yeah.
With all this help, why is it so hard to go in a restaurant? I'm always asking them to like modify this or modify that, and we've lost a lot of our good vegan restaurants here in Orlando.
Yeah.
Insight on that?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I know I used to love going to some of the restaurants that are closed that used to be here, right? You miss some of them when they close. I think it's a matter of certain cities, and it's just a matter of like how well the business is doing. I know right now there's New Moon Cafe. I don't know if you've been to that one in College Park.
I have not.
So New Moon Cafe is whole food plant-based and vegan, and they have great soups. You can get juices there, and I love some of the food they offer. That's been around now, I think, for what? I don't know, 5-6 years, something like that. Yeah. Now Dandelion Cafe used to be here. That's gone, right?
Why can't a regular restaurant just have a vegan option?
Right, I agree. I mean, I'm with you. I wish more of them did. I think the restaurants, though, that are smart are moving that direction, at least having some options, because more and more people are starting to think more health consciously. We were in San Diego over a couple years ago, and what a difference. I mean, not only are you finding vegan restaurants, but you're finding like organic vegan restaurants where you go in and you're eating like 100% organic and plant-based, and just you walk out feeling amazing. So if you're ever in South Florida, though, I do have a recommendation. Go to Hippocrates Institute and buy the lunch buffet. $36, and they have more than 200 different organic raw plants. Every kind of microgreen you could imagine, sprouts. It's just fantastic. So if you're in West Palm, Hippocrates Institute. West Palm Beach. You can go there for lunch. They serve lunch usually in like 11 till 1, something like that. If you go to Hippocrates, if you're down in West Palm, go there for lunch. Spend the $36, and when you eat all those foods, you're going to feel so good when you're done because it's all organic, it's all raw. It's absolutely fantastic. They bring people in there from all over the world who are healing from all kinds of stuff. Feed them an organic, raw diet. A lot of wheatgrass shots. Anyone do wheatgrass shots in here? Yes. So good for you, right?
Smoothies, I try to throw them and everything.
Yeah.
I was a vegetarian for most of my life and then started eating meat because I started working out a lot. So I'm like on the opposite journey.
Yeah.
It's really funny because I stopped eating meat for almost 18 years.
Yeah.
And then just started a year ago eating meat. So I'm listening to your story like, man, I was already on track. Now I feel off. Going in the reverse direction.
Anyone else have a question?
Will they seed if you wait how long?
Yeah. You know what I do? I compost them in my backyard before they have a chance to seed. But I'll say this, I have amaranth that I've grown full grown that has gone to seed in the backyard, but it has to have space to grow. So out of the compost pile, I have a couple of amaranth that have grown to seed. And so they would go to seed eventually, but in the trays this size, I always cut everything before it gets, too crazy. And if I don't sell it at the market, my wife and I eat it ourselves. So.
It's one, so maybe one more question, and then if people want to talk to you after,
Yeah.
chat afterwards.
Sounds good. Does anyone have another question? Please.
You have a great list of books, very good. And the physician committee is awesome. I listen to Neil Bernard all the time. I would also add the podcast, The Exam Room.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see it. It's in here?
Exam Room Podcast, what she's talking about, is a really good podcast to learn a lot of great stuff. It's from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM, and it's run by a guy named Chuck Carroll, and he calls himself the weight loss champion because he weighed 385 pounds and now weighs 160. So he has me beat. It's called The Exam Room. The Exam Room. And they have a lot of episodes, and you can search their library for all kinds of really cool stuff that will help you with that. But thank you. Yeah. The Plant Proof podcast is good with Simon Hill. I like that one too, for sure. I could take one more. Does anyone else have a question?
Can you talk a little bit more about the Canada plate?
Okay, yeah. So what Canada, if you pull up their plate, Canada's plate, what's beautiful about it is they took dairy away. I don't want to bash dairy because there's some beneficial compounds in dairy, but dairy is going to be lots of hormones in dairy, lots of estrogens, bovine estrogen, right? Lots of they're feeding them antibiotics. You're getting all of that. There's pus in there. There's just a lot of stuff. That's on our plate more because the industry is at the table pushing dairy to be on the plate. Canada has a glass of water